today, and it was the ladies over there, and not just ladies. Yeah. So, Zhenya, what are you going to tell us about?
Hello?
Or maybe you can even introduce yourself, what you do, etc.
Okay, the introduction will be on the next slide. It's me again, and I will be talking about some observation from DevOps engineer, and it's just my opinion, but I'm not thinking about myself like only one person who knows how to do it right, or somewhat the knight in the shining armor. It's just what I saw in daily practice. So, about me, I have something about 15 years experience of working in Linux. I worked as a developer, as an instructor, etc., etc. But, as I usually say, at the present time, I should call myself a DevOps engineer. And I am CEO and leader of the small team named osshelp. So we are SRE and DevOps engineer. So, what I want to talk about today, it's about most typical mistakes made by developers on a daily basis. I honestly try to somehow make this presentation about the front end, but it's really difficult because the most of the items from my list is related to the famous site or even ebook named the 12-factor application. Sorry. And honestly, this speech will contain at least half of them. So, as it usually happens, we start from something small, and when application grows, there are some problems which are honestly hard to resolve. So at this moment, the most of developers just write code as best as they could. And when the time passes, some decisions are clearly considered as bad, but it's already too late to change it. So, what was wrong at the moment? As it usually happens, it's when business wants some features, and when you don't have enough time for technical debt, you know this game. This is immortal problem, always endless. So, is there any other way? Yes, of course. If any of you is interested, I really recommend you to read the 12-factor application. It's really useful. Maybe it's kind of theoretical, but it really could sell a huge amount of time in future. So the most hard point in this, not about reading or understanding, it's about selling this point to yourself and to your colleagues, and maybe or your employer, because some changes, some of these requirements will require some changes in development cycle. So the next, this is very basic things. I honestly think this is very boring, but in our practice we really saw some projects who has such problems. So maybe it's hard to believe, but in 2021 there are some projects who don't use any version control system. They really using something like copying the source code from developer machine to the production server. There is no history of changes, there is nothing. So the second problem, it's about knowing the dependencies. So I'm not talking about building dependencies, I'm also talking about runtime dependencies. We saw many problems where it worked on my machine, and when it deployed to production, I'm sorry, shit happens, as they usually say. So, and the last point in this, it's about knowledge and documentation. because it often happens that there could be some changes in team, and people will leave your team, and they will leave with the knowledge. And at this moment, business with at the hard point where no one knows how it works or how it's changed, and it's really quite often happens. So I'm sorry for mistakes. How it should be today? I mean, how to do it right for now. Maybe you won't believe me, but some projects really don't have different environments for production and development, and maybe QA testing, staging, RC, etc., etc. And even if they have those environments, there are huge differences between them. And when you test code in some testing stand, and when this code will be released, there will be many bitter surprises for you. So the basic point, your environments should be as close as possible to each other. Yes, it is impossible to make the production and development and staging almost identical, but they should be as close as possible. So this point also from 12-factor application. The next one is about automatization. You should really consider automate everything you do. I'm not talking only about testing, I'm also talking about building, and the latest, it's about deployment. We saw many scenarios where deployments are made by hands, and only one mysterious person know how to correctly deploy these, and even when this person is sick or away, no one knows how to deploy the new version of application to the production.
Actually, that's what I face on a daily basis.
That's why I'm talking about it, because we see it almost every day. It could happen not only in small projects, but in quite big enough. So you should really think about automatization. And the latest point, it's about cloud readiness. Yes, it's a fancy item. It's you should have it, but you don't have. You don't have time for this. So the points about cloud readiness is simple. We saw many examples when credentials or connection parameters just hard-coded inside of source code. And it's quite easy when you are dealing with scripted application. I mean, Python, Ruby. Yes, it's a bit hard to change it on the fly, but it's quite different when you are having some similar problems with something like Java. You can't change deployed Java application. For example, we have a project on support right now, which consists of dozens of Java applications, and probably the third part of it, no one knows how to recompile it, because the people who write it, they left the team. So, and it's a huge pain in the buttocks for the operational guys, because you have to use some quite dirty hacks to just get it work, because those applications require some very specific things that are hard to repeat in cloud environment, maybe I say. So let's move further. About hard-coded credentials and parameters, I think it's enough. Also, we saw the scenarios where those parameters are hard-coded in many times, not in one source file, one file, one configuration file, just many different places of web application. It's quite a nightmare. About stateless web application. To be clear, I'm not talking about databases or any other system application who require persistent data under the food. I'm talking about strictly web applications. And if you're writing a modern web application, you should really consider to make it stateless. So you shouldn't think about file system as something persistent. Any file that you wrote, any file that you uploaded could be deleted at any time, at any possible moment, because when we use something modern like at least Docker Swarm or maybe Kubernetes, your application could move to other nodes literally at any moment. So if you want to write something, you should write it to standard out, because it's a typical way to collect logs, or at least use some library which will give you an opportunity to switch logging output based on your environment, etc. And the same goes for uploads. Many projects have some data. I'm not talking about static files like CSS, JavaScript, etc. Not about front-end. I'm talking about an uploads from users or maybe content manager. So you should also upload not to local directory as a creature's habits. Many developers are doing so. You should upload to the remote location, something like S3 compatible storage. I mean, AWS, S3, or digital ocean spaces, or at least your own mini or self-hosted S3 server. It will help you highly with the latest point in this list with scaling, because we also saw many cases when the web application just can be scaled, because it really can work only as one instance. When you launch the second instance, you will have a huge list of problems. It may sound crazy, but as it is. Your application should support working model as many instances, and I'm not talking about only web application, I mean backend. If you're creating some background work or something that will take the job and process it, you should also create it in the scenario where you could launch multiple instances when you need it. Because when your project is small, okay, it will be enough, one server, but when you grow, what you will do? You won't have a time to rewrite it from scratch. Business usually don't give such opportunity. You should write more features, sorry. So, as quickly as it is, next to the typical fails, what usually could happen? As I already said, almost everything could be hard-coded. Parameters, credentials, it's a huge problem. Because when we're talking about cloud application, you should at least support taking your parameters from .env file. And more modern application, for example, if we're talking about Docker containers, you should add support from support for the taking parameters from the environment, because it's a standard way for those applications, and there are plenty of frameworks who will give you such opportunity just from the box. You don't have to do anything more. So the second one problem, it's about inline network input-output. Usually it's something like external REST API or maybe external mail gateway, and what it will cost. In one day, your site will go down, and there is no recent changes, no releases. The server is okay, anything is okay, but your code just doesn't work. Why? Just because some external application died or experiencing some huge problems, and your code just waiting for the answer from these remote locations. For example, exchange rates from rubles to dollars, or news So my point here, you should do it either asynchronously, or you should refresh those data or send this data in the background. You should never do it in line as synchronous, I mean blocking input-output, because you will literally shoot both of your feeds one day. And about hidden dependencies, no, I think the picture show the best example how it usually happens, because I don't know, it works on my machine. I don't know why it doesn't work in production. It's easy because the developer forgot that some binaries are required for work, or maybe some external libraries which were forgotten to add to gem file, requirements.txt, PHP composer. So there are some plenty disasters because of this. And final, about deployments. Any deployment should be repeatable. It's as plain as it is. It's really strict requirement. We saw some projects without any using even ORM frameworks. They are literally applying migrations by hand. And it's people. People make mistakes, and it will end very badly one day. And the last point is about monitoring. For example, also very bad example, when you deployed a new release and it looks okay, and your monitoring says it's okay, but there is a huge problem. Your site is responsible with blank pages. Yes, it will respond with 200 HTTP code, but nonetheless your users can't use your site because it answers with empty pages, and your monitoring is silent. It thinks that everything is okay. This is a very clear example, but for example, your website or your web application on external site could work just fine, but maybe you broke the registration process, the ordering process, something mission or business critical for your firm, for your business, for your application. So you should at least monitor those parameters. I mean, if your internet shop, you should add to your monitoring user registrations, adding items to your cart, anything important for your business process. The state that site is working isn't enough, because you will lose money and you will find it only when some huge time passes on. So I think this is most of it. I try to say it as fast as possible, but I think it is. There are my contacts. Any questions? No?
Thank you very much. You know, I personally face so many things you are talking about. I mean, it's the truth of life, probably. So many questions.
Yes.
Maybe it's too concrete and too practical, but do you have any idea how to monitor turn servers?
Turn servers?
Turn.
Turn?
Turn. T-U-R-N.
Turn. Not but true. Yes, it's about network address translations. Stun and turn.
Yeah, exactly.
It depends on exact applications. Modern applications, for example, like Grafana, Prometheus, they have not only health check endpoints, but they also have metrics endpoints, and those metrics would be easily imported in modern monitoring. So basically, you should check the feature list of your application and just try to understand what it can or can do. For example, you should at least monitor that application is up, that port is open, that this port is accepting connections. For example, if we're talking about TCP connections. If we're talking about UDP connections, probably you should write a simple client just to simulate typical communication. But without internal logic, this is all that you can do in this situation. Maybe you can use something like, I don't know, NetData, if you heard about this application. And NetData can monitor custom counters. In combination with firewall IP tables, you can monitor how many packets and bytes are transferred to and from your server, just to understand how it works. But I can talk about it very, very long time. But in the end, it's all about futures of your application.
A question from you, Ola?
No.
Ola, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, I have a bit of question. All the things you're talking about is quite right, but is it about a big and growing project, or we have to do this from the beginning? Because in this case, we have some kind of problems with Agile. I only have one server, but I have to write a lot of stuff that will probably never be used for its multiple servers. So how do you decide this? Is it about making from the beginning, or we are going to refactor it later, just don't forget to refactor it?
That's the most important part, because you can never know how it will end. You can think that, yeah, this is a small project, we will have time to add some required feature later, but later business says, we don't have time, you should write this new feature, we need to release it. And no one really knows how to correctly answer this, because this is the same problem as with testing, I mean quality assurance testing. When you ignore the testing from the start, you will pay for it hugely. The same goes here. I guess it depends on your budget or size of your team, but at least some of these things you should do from the start, or you will basically regret it.
If you're saying that we don't have to do it from the beginning, how we give it to the business? We have to do this right now, or we have to do it later? How do you talk it to your client? Because yes, you're right, they always want the cheapest option, and then everything about the future.
Okay, we are talking about in-house development or outsourced development?
In-house.
In-house. So when you're talking with your colleagues, I think it's easier to sell them the shared responsibility, because when it fails, the business doesn't care who made a mistake. The business will lose some money. So this is the biggest selling point, and as I said in the beginning, it's the hardest part. You should sell it to your colleagues that this is important, and if we are, for example, blind, we don't have monitoring for critical, we don't have visibility for what things are going, and this will take quite a toll on all developers. It will eat up your nerves, because you write a code and every time you are scary that you will break something, and when on the next day you will come to your workplace, you will have quite a negative day, because you made a mistake. But how to not do it anymore? It's impossible. People make mistakes, and the easiest way to catch those mistakes is to get as quick as possible the feedback. I may be talking like a Captain Hindsight here, but it's a modern, I don't know, Tantra quote. You should release as quick as possible, and you should get feedback as quick as possible. You changed something, and you should be able to observe the results of your change, or you should know as fast as possible when you break something. So when you don't have a monitoring, you will suffer. When you don't have, when you have an environment with the different contents. I mean, when you're deploying from testing to production, and I'm sorry, shit happened, this will be mostly your fault, as it usually happens. So it's in your best interest to sell it to your colleagues, not to cover your ass, just to protect business from losses. But nonetheless, there is some line in the sand between MVP, minimum viable project, when you are a small startup, when you are just testing the hypothesis, will this is start, and when are you already in production. This is probably the place when you should have most of those things. Because at this point you're trying to earn some money for business, and if you don't control this situation this time, you probably will fail. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, kind of. And another one, I read in the literature the idea that, it's hard to predict what exactly do you need on the next step. So some writers recommend to not try to create something for the future, but just staying with what you have, because 80% of things you expect in the future will not be here. So it's probably you will have to make some other changes, not the one that you was planning before. So it's not a good idea to try to do it in the beginning. You just come to the stage, and on this stage you make a factory. So how do you feel about this one? Or your ideas are very basic, so it's not about it?
Are you talking about preemptive optimization? Or I misunderstood you?
Factoring, like preparing too complicated code to expect some future changes to meet these changes.
Maybe I misunderstood your question, but most of the things I talked about, it's how the things right now. I mean, you should have CI/CD and you should have system and application monitoring. So which part are you considering to get rid of or skip in the development process? Can you?
So it's just about this rule. It's not unnecessary. It will be needed anyway, and you have to fight for it with business anyway.
I think the most clear example as when you learn something, for example, framework, you will spend some time on learning process. But after you learned it, you will do the same work much faster. You already know how to do it. The same goes how to build a deployment pipeline. The same goes how to add some library to export monitoring metrics. I mean, it's hard and it will take more time the first iteration, but later you can just start from a boilerplate where you have some of your previously made solutions for this one.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Any questions? Yeah, thank you so much. I think you have your own show on TV on YouTube talking about stuff, Thanks.
No, I doubt it.
Yeah.